The winter of 1944 was so cold that rivers froze. Yet in the months that followed, as the Allies advanced on Germany, 250,000 people, mostly Jews, were evacuated from concentration camps in their path. Some were moved in open coal wagons or closed cattle trucks, but most were marched on foot along roads and across country. Only the strongest survived. Among them was Kitty Felix, aged 17, but already a veteran of Auschwitz death camp. From Bielsko in Poland, where she came from a prosperous Jewish family, Kitty survived nearly 2 years in Auschwitz, where, on a daily basis, she witnessed thousands of Jews being sent to the gas chambers. Abused, beaten and starving, she was forced to sort through the mounds of belongings stolen from victims. Now Kitty Hart-Moxon and one of a decreasing number of eyewitnesses, Kitty has been back to Auschwitz several times. But the story of the death marches has never fully been told. So when her friend Stephen Smith, the director of Britain's Holocaust Centre, heard that she planned to retrace her steps, he offered to go with her and document that journey. Now she's come back to Poland to recreate the 1,000-mile journey which took her back and forth across Europe. It began at Auschwitz in November 1944. Kitty and 100 other women, including her mother, were picked out by a German industrialist for special war work. Loaded into cattle trucks, they headed northeast towards their first stop, the labour camp at Gross-Rosen.
Kitty, what I want to really understand is, why is this trip important to you?
Because how can the historians put it together if the survivors cannot remember? They've got no documentation. If you come here, there's nothing. What can historians do here without the survivors? I had a picture of Auschwitz, of different things in Auschwitz. But when I went in there, I confirmed everything that I remembered was confirmed.
How does this compare at first glance to being at Birkenau, Kitty?
I'll tell you, it's dead primitive. It's
Primitive?
It's dead primitive. It's nothing like the guardhouse in Birkenau. The Auschwitz hierarchy would never have done with this. They would have liked it a little better than that. You're looking at the main Lagerstraße, and that's the Appellplatz.
Do you remember any of the features that we see here?
Well, I remember the Appellplatz, because I know it was very close to where we came in, and I would say we were on somewhere down there, on this side, in a wooden shed. I wasn't here very long, don't forget.
What have we got here?
Okay, well, we're walking into a block. I tell you, that's sheer luxury. Yeah. You wouldn't have had a luxurious block like this in Auschwitz or Birkenau. First of all, look at the floor.
The concrete.
It's actually got concrete floor. We had just mud. The bunk beds are, yes, let's pick up one of these floods, because that's really interesting. Now you see, you had a board like this. You had these boards, and then there was a straw mattress. In Reichenbach, we had a block. In the center of this block was a heating channel. And you know how cold it is here now, right? Well, we were absolutely frozen. So what did we do? We burnt the boards. One night was an inspection. They came in, and I thought, that's funny, there's a warm in here. They had touched this heating channel, and they wanted to know who made the fire, and nobody owned up. So they took off the straw mattresses and found slats were missing. And absolute fury. So there was a roll call almost after that. And the punishment, I think we had no food for 24 hours. And then one person was picked out and the hair was shaved off. And that was my friend Henya.
After 2 days at Gross-Rosen, Kitty and the Auschwitz group were moved 20 miles southeast by train. Their destination, Reichenbach, where the electronics company Telefunken had set up production for the Nazi war effort.
We were taken across the fields into a camp,
There's a train line coming in, look there.
Yeah, that's right. Comes from Crossroads.
There's a station, perhaps. And
Yeah.
look, I mean, that's actually where they're marking
Yeah, well,
the
across
camp.
the fields, across the
So
field.
that would make sense,
That
wouldn't
follows.
it? Which I guess
That
would
follows.
be actually over that direction.
We'll go find a way to the camp.
Okay, great.
See this pathway?
Yeah, yeah.
That would have been where the SS would have been walking,
Okay.
and they didn't like walking in the high mud. So it's feasible.
Let's
Yes,
have a
they
look.
would have built this.
Let's have a look in here. You know, it reminds one of these sort of stables where you have, if you like, the animals kept downstairs and the cavalry living upstairs.
Oh,
isn't
no,
it?
wait a minute. That's...
Hey, look at this.
No, yes, that would you believe?
Skinheads, white
Yeah,
power.
the skinheads have arrived. Look at this.
Ku Klux Klan.
Absolutely. This was a block, because they wouldn't come here to deface this like this if it was nothing else.
If it had nothing to do with the past, yeah.
That's it. So that's what it is.
The women were marched 2 miles to and from work in the dark. But even darkness couldn't hide some landmarks on the way to the factory.
You're walking down the street like this. Did you recognise the houses?
Yes,
scenery here?
this type of houses, definitely this type of houses. And you find on the left-hand side, there came this wonderful smell, tantalizing smell of baking bread.
It was something like this, perhaps.
Yeah, something like that. That's it. Well,
Have
let's
a look
go
in
in.
the window.
Jeszcze raz. Z tyłu? At the back is the bakery.
There's always been a bakery here.
Zawsze było, tak?
Tak,
During the war there was this
Ah.
bakery here, and they were baking bread here every day.
From the bakery, Kitty remembers it was just a short distance to the place where she worked. In 1941, the Telefunken Company had taken over a former Jewish-owned weaving factory on the outskirts of town.
Now look at this. Now this was a huge hall with all the machines were here. 2 of us, that means a German woman and myself, were sitting at a kind of desk. Underneath this desk, you put in huge cylinders of, well, we think it was carbon dioxide or something like that. And I had to carry these very heavy cylinders for miles away because there was another hall somewhere. And you carried these cylinders. They carried them, and I had to place them underneath this contraption. And then the German woman, she wasn't allowed to speak to me. She was just showing me like this. And she was maneuvering these dials. Nearly every day, this German woman, but it was a desk. We were sitting at the desk. She used to bring a sandwich and hide it, behind something else. And she'd point to me there. And she'd bring me a sandwich every day.
Were you kept warm?
Yes. Yeah, it was reasonably warm. I mean, warmer than we've been accustomed to. It was reasonable temperature.
But generally speaking, you were working hard, but you were well looked after insofar as you were kept alive.
You wouldn't have survived here for very long on the food. If it hadn't been for the German woman with 1 sandwich a day, you would have been hard pushed to survive.
Then, on a day she'll never forget, it was her mother's 55th birthday, her world changed again.
So it was the 18th of February, and without any warning whatsoever, they burst into our hut, roll call, whistles blew, and just 1 word was said, and that was Marschbefehl, which means marching order. Mm-hmm. And before you knew where you were, you had to stand in 5s. Before you knew where you were, we were out of the camp. My mother said, don't worry about being cold, being hot and being hungry. You look at scenery, because you've not seen scenery like this since you left home. And I looked to see this old church, that must have been there. So we must have gone that way, and then round. Many of the women had wooden clogs, and that was just not feasible. The snow was so high, and there wasn't a pathway, so that wasn't feasible. Anyway, I came out of Auschwitz with a pair of shoes. Didn't fit me, but I had some shoes, so did my mother. I brought her some shoes from where I was working. In the 4 months that we walked to the camp, they started disintegrating. And probably at the first day on this march, my shoes had gone totally. The sole just opened up and I was completely wet through. So the first thing I did is throw away my shoes. And my mother soon after that. But now what happened then is that you had all these thousands of people walking. They threw off the clothes.
Why are people shedding clothes? Because surely when you
It
stop,
was
you
hot.
need
No,
it when you stop.
I know, but you didn't think of that, I'm afraid. You just literally couldn't carry it. Everything was heavy. You just, by the time you walked to the end of the day, you literally couldn't carry anything. Anyway, whatever it was, people started shedding. And things were lying, jumpers and things. So what did you do? You picked up a jumper and with the sleeves, you wrapped it around your feet. And that's how you walked. Most of the guards were at the rear. Got it? And as soon as people started lagging behind at the rear, that killed them off. All the time as you were walking, you heard shouts everywhere.
They were heading for the border between Poland and Czechoslovakia. In the way was the Owl mountain range, its peak over 1,000 meters high. They had no food, most of them were barefoot, and the snow was often up to their knees. Nor were they the only people on the move. One morning, the straggling column arrived at a plateau.
There were hundreds of people here, civilians, German civilians, and carts and horses. Some people were getting up, having breakfast, and it took the Auschwitz group 10 seconds to weigh up the situation, because we'd been without food for, well, I couldn't tell you how long.
What did you do?
What did we do? We attacked. Attacked. Why? Because at the side of these carts, we saw sausages hanging, meat was hanging, buckets were hanging. And we thought, my God, that's it. We just went for it. And you see the guards, the guards were saying, anstellen, anstellen, you know what that means? Get in line, get in line. And clobbering people everywhere with the rifle butts. But of course, they couldn't shoot because of all these civilians there. So I tell you, if it hadn't been tragedy, it was high comedy. And then I saw a big bucket. And I thought, oh, there's got to be food in there, isn't it? I pulled out this bucket. And it was like a galvanized, it was so heavy. I took this to my mother. And the girls were actually laughing, because they said, a bucket of fat, what are we going to do with that? And my mother said, that's marvellous, it's absolutely jubilant, that's just what we need. We're going to put our feet in it, we're going to smear it on our feet. Oh, my mother said, it's good for your complexion. We smeared that one. And some people ate it, but we didn't eat it. Because
But you're using it for protection against the elements.
We used it for protection. We put our hands in it because we didn't have any gloves, and we didn't have anything on our feet. And it was marvellous because you dipped your feet in it and then wrapped your feet into, and it was nice and smooth. So we hung on to this bucket and we passed it down the line.
Can I ask you about your feelings
Yeah.
when you come back onto a place like this? What goes through your mind?
What goes through my mind, that this came like manna from heaven. Somebody sent these people to us to save us. Because no way would we have survived if these refugees hadn't been here and we hadn't got some food at that stage.
In ever-decreasing numbers, they came down from the mountains and closer to the Czech border. This whole region was crisscrossed by railways, but they had to walk and sleep in the open. But so did the guards, and when the opportunity arose, they too tried to find shelter from the brutal weather.
Now what they couldn't do, they couldn't go themselves and leave us outside, so we're looking for something big where they shove everybody in.
Several hundred people in. Well, this is big
Well,
enough.
I think a few thousand.
Yeah.
So it could be that one group came in here. They might have gone all over here. There were more buildings here than
Does
this.
this remind you, though, of what you were in?
Well, it was very much like that. Whether this was the particular hall, I wouldn't know. But it was very much like this, with the coal dust. We slept on the floor, and it was warm. It was fairly warm inside. I don't know where the heating came. Well, it appeared warm to us because we've been outside.
Outside, yeah. Sure.
That's right. But it had a roof like that, quite huge, and it was packed. And we were very warm because we were absolutely packed out in here.
Into a space like
in
this.
a space
yeah,
like that.
Sure. Once you stayed here overnight, where did
Yes.
you move to then?
I think we moved onto the Czech side, crossing the frontier.
After a further week's forced march, the remnants of the column arrived at a women's camp at Trutnov in Czechoslovakia. But again, there was only a temporary respite, for within a day came the familiar order to move on.
And then they took us to a siding.
Something like this?
Something like this, with open coal trucks. Now these look a little on the big side, but nonetheless, pretty well, this is what they looked like. Ah, well that's it, it's a little high, but it's a coal truck and it's almost bigger than what I remember. The guard went in with a piece of chalk, marked out a territory, put on a blanket, and he said, "This is my territory. Everyone that steps over is going to get shot and out."
What was done? What was done with the corpses?
We didn't do anything. The guard came along and threw them off.
They were thrown over the edge?
Over the yeah. So, you know, we kept away from him.
So when you finally arrived, where did you arrive, Kitty?
In a place called Porta. That was the very first station we came to. We read up there, it said Porta. And that's where they threw us out. Now, in the meantime, I would say about half the people had died of starvation.
Though they didn't know it at the time, Kitty and her companions did have a final destination. For on February the 10th, 8 days before the start of her death march, Albert Speer, now Hitler's armament minister, had sent a secret telex to his friend Karl Hanke, the governor of South Poland. In it, Speer asked for the transfer of the Telefunken workforce. The reason? Their unique skills in the production of radio valves for jamming transmitters and equipment for high-performance aircraft. The destination? An underground factory built for the electronics giant Philips, whose entire production had been moved from Holland to Germany. The route of the death march had taken Kitty's group past similar underground workings in the Polish mountains. Codenamed Giant, the complex was planned to link up 8 secret rocket and weapons factories by underground railway systems. None was finished by the end of the war, and only 2 are officially open today.
My gosh, look at the size of this cabin.
Why? Well, I think we need to go and have a look.
Narrow gauge railway, look.
You see those trolleys, they moved off the stone.
Just look how far back it goes.
It's absolutely gigantic, isn't it? I don't know if we can get up.
They obviously haven't finished it.
Look at that.
Second story, look.
Well, it's been dynamited, you see that big. The whole of the mountain range was full of these caves, people working in there. 40,000 prisoners. But did you know, we walked over the top of all these caves and we didn't know. We heard rumours, but you couldn't see anything. It was all underground.
And in just a short time exploring the underground complex, the weather outside had changed. February 1945 seemed a lot closer.
Some days were like this, and we were walking just feet wrapped up in bits of rag, and we got wet through and absolutely frozen, wet. And that's how it was, sometimes at night.
When you see it cooling down like this, you have to ask yourself, how did anybody survive in these conditions?
I know. The snow was much, much deeper, but it was blowing like this, snowing like this, and this is why so many people died on the way. The first night was spent on the flat, on the frozen ground, in the snow. No, nobody said more than one word, you know. The guards would string runter, bang, down you went. Straight down, like this. You come lie on
in the snow, wherever you were?
No, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And you lie on top of me, see? And you change over.
So what happens when you're down there? Do you just freeze to death on the snow?
No, strange enough you didn't, you know. The snow was dry. You could manage about half an hour. And then you'd have to change over and somebody else would lie down. You know, you're just an animal and nothing else, aren't you? And you got an instinct. So what do? One single animal could survive. So we were just like penguins. But then you had a lot of people that had never been to Auschwitz. They didn't realise that you do need collective help. And they just couldn't survive.
Let's get out of here, because we've been here for 2 hours, never mind 6 days. I'm frozen.
I'm hot.
After 6 days and nearly 500 miles in an open coal truck, Kitty and her mother eventually arrived at Porto on the River Weser. Among the first things they saw before being marched off to their camp was the monument to a former Kaiser. The clouds which swirl round it today are caused by warm air seeping from abandoned wartime factories cut out of the hill beneath.
So we've come up to that tower on the hill, and we're looking across toward the station, and we've got this sketch plan, look, which we dug out. It was done just after the war. Now somewhere
At the back there was the camp.
yeah. So what we're going to do, we're going to go down
And
up
find the camp.
up that main road, up that valley there, and we're going to see if we can find the camp tucked behind that
That's
hill.
right, and then find the pathway to the top of the entrance. This was the way up to the top. It was just a dirt track, and it was wide because you had to walk 5 abreast, and then on 6 actually, because the guards, the women guards, were walking at the side. All of a sudden, we come to a clearing, and that looks like it, very much like that. And then suddenly, there was a hole in this mountainside.
A sketch made by the British in 1945 shows a double entrance into the Philips factory. Looking at the same place today makes it clear that the tunnels at the top of the Porter escarpment are now irretrievably closed. The secrets of what went on here are getting even more difficult to find. Nature is reclaiming the area, and the local authority at Porta Westfalica has little interest in opening the tunnels, even for historical reasons.
These were images that were taken by a British officer.
Well, I tell you that the hole that I was in didn't have this machinery, but it had kind of tables. Now that's more like it, you know, that kind of tables.
The flat tables with concrete floors.
Flat table and concrete floors.
Another document that we've dug up as well might be interesting to you. You know how you described
that's right. 11 shafts down or
11 shafts. Well,
Yeah.
precisely 11 shafts.
That's right. I knew it was 11 shafts. I tell you why. I think there were some numbers someplace as you went down on the platform, wasn't it?
If you look on
Were there
this
some
one, look.
numbers?
If you look on here, look. That says number 4.
Oh, there you are. That's it. Now,
So
as you went
that's
down,
going to be this
that's
floor
right.
here.
That's right. Now, as you went down, it was
Inches.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You came to 11s.
Just describe for me
Yeah.
what it was like to go down there in the morning and
Well, you were very tired when you got to the entrance because you'd walk this pathway here, up and down, barefoot on a rough ground. When I got there, you were really very tired. And then suddenly, say the first day we didn't know what it was. We thought we were going to gas us inside this bunker. And then we realized they only took a few people at a time. And there was a flat thing like you see here. I think there were 4 ropes, something like that. And the thing started to descend. And as you descended, you saw these numbers. And you came to this number 11, and there was a small room. We were led into this room, sat at a table, and it took about 10 minutes to teach you what you had to do, because it was something connecting small wires to something else, what they wouldn't know. And sometimes you had to work with pincers to do it. And the problem was here, you can imagine, there wasn't enough air.
But there are some people who want the story told, and local historian Jochen Bergman has written a book about Porter's underground war.
What did they do in here?
You made here oil.
Yes,
The
that
oil
was a
refinery.
refinery, yes.
And here on the right side there was
Yeah.
an elevator until
Yes.
the top, and
Yes.
there the big machines was transported
They transported,
to the
yeah,
entrance from the top.
the machinery.
The machines.
The
so
machine-
directly up here was the route to the Philips factory.
Here, yes, here
Yes.
now on the right.
What was the relationship between this factory and the one up above, which Kitty worked in?
2 different factories. The factory here makes oil,
Yeah.
and the factories on the top makes electronic.
So what did
things.
they call this here?
It's called DAX 1. The name of the underground was animal names.
Like what?
Dax is an animal.
Oh, I see.
Dax
yeah.
is like an animal, like a dog in that.
Oh,
In
It's a
the,
badger.
It's a badger.
And the
Yeah.
underground on the top, it named Stör 1. This is a fish name.
What's this, 1944? 20th
The
of,
old.
yeah, inscriptions.
The oil refinery extended for 500 metres underneath the hill and was directly connected to the nearby railway system. Bergman has been inside the tunnels many times and has spent days exploring and mapping the underground factories. His research has exposed a vast network of subterranean caverns and shattered concrete halls, many not revealed on official plans. Other photographs show abandoned machinery and evidence that the tunnels were being used long after the facilities had been officially closed down. At the beginning of April 1945, Kitty and her mother were once again on the move. The camp was evacuated and the women forced into trains to be sent back to the east. The Allies weren't far behind them, for on the 3rd of April, American tanks reached the River Weser. Kitty and her Auschwitz group, now down to 50 after, for no reason, they've been split up, were taken the 100 miles to Belsen concentration camp. Here, conditions were so chaotic that there was no room for them, so they were sent back to the train.
And of course, under armed guard, we were actually pushed into a truck, and it was complete, total darkness and no ventilation at all. That's the first thing that came apparent. Almost immediately, people started gasping for breath, and there was like a panic inside, and everybody scrambling to the side of the truck, and then water running on the side of the tracks, that condensation. And I got hold of my mother and I said, I'm just going to get to the floor. Got to the floor of the truck, and lo and behold, there were some gaps. And I had a knife on me, and so I scraped furiously and I enlarged the gap. And so I grabbed my mother, got her down, and she started breathing, and then I started breathing. We took breaths, in turns. Anyway, people started fainting and going unconscious and fighting one another, screaming, and then it became very quiet. There was a gravel path or something, obviously, and you could hear footsteps. And as these footsteps came closer, we started shouting, "Aufmachen, aufmachen, schnell, schnell aufmachen," crying out for air. And then suddenly, this truck opened and there was just a panic. Everybody just threw themselves onto this open space, and we fell out onto 3 men. Somebody said, "We're not going back into there, might as well, shoot us now." So my mother, in the best German, said, "We demand to be taken into a concentration camp."
Well, this looks like it could have been.
Yes, that's one of the remnants of the barracks, because as you know, post-liberation, the first things that happened, the camp was burnt down. We were just pushed into one of the barracks, and we couldn't communicate with these people because we're Hungarians. But the very first thing that struck us, that they looked in pretty good condition, and we thought, my God, there's got to be some food here. Yeah. And we had a fight, and threw some of these girls off the beds and found that they were hoarding sugar. And then we realized this is what they were living on. They were living on this hoard of sugar that they'd collected.
Where had they got the sugar from?
Well, there was a refinery, sugar refinery, down the road somewhere, and that's where some of the French prisoners of war were working, and they, somehow or other, supplied the prisoners with some of the sugar.
Tell me how the liberation happened.
Yeah, I must tell you what happened. Yes, well, we were in here, and about 2 days before liberation, bullets were flying all over because we realized the front was very close. And by that time, I couldn't walk anymore, and my mother was just lying in a corner. She couldn't stand up at all. And I was sitting near a fence, and I don't know which side. It must have been down this end there. And across the fence, I could see stores, SS stores with loads and loads of shelves full of bread.
Just outside the camp?
Outside the electrified fence. And I was just sitting there mesmerized. And somebody shook me by the shoulder and said, "Look, there's a military convoy there. It's tanks." And there were screams and shouts, "Help, help, help." And then one tank just swiveled round and just smashed through the gate. And that was the point of liberation.
So it seems to be that this street with the camp behind us and the factory in front of us,
That's
where
right.
everything was happening really.
The women going to work along here turned left into the factory, This, by the way, is the commandant's house. It was given to him. That's right.
So this is his kind of villa in the middle of it all, where
That's right. He was very close by, close to the factory, close to the camp. To give him his due, he didn't blow the camp up, and he had order to do so.
And then this was the way into town, was it?
That's the way into town, straight in. We all poured into town here, streamed into town at point of liberation.
And what was the atmosphere as you kind of came along
it was
this
just
road?
euphoric. I mean, I don't know where we found the strength from, because I mean, I was on my last lap. I mean, that's absolutely true. I weighed 5 stone. Don't forget, we went on a path of destruction. Do you know what we did in some of the houses? We opened up the taps and flooded the place. We tipped all the drawers out and set fire to the interior.
Hardly adequate payback for over 2 years of captivity, yet on April the 14th, 1945, perhaps immaterial. The death march was at last over.
We set out with certain ideas about covering your death march and final 6 months. What do we want people to learn, and do you think we've achieved that?
I'm sure we've achieved that, because a lot of people couldn't understand what happened the last 6 months of the war, and that people were shunted from place to place, and trains were going all over the place, and death marches were all over. That hasn't actually been documented properly, and that's been a good thing to do.
How do you account for your survival, though?
Well, we knew how to fight for our food, we knew how to fight for somewhere to sleep, and a lot of people didn't know. They didn't know how to handle the situation.
Has it been a valuable journey?
Oh, it's been invaluable. I think so. I've always wanted to do it, and I've learned so much myself, especially this business of why was I transported all that way? Why did the armaments minister pick out this group of women to be transferred from 1,000 miles? But he didn't worry about how they were going to get there.
What do you think has been most valuable about this journey for you, Kitty?
57 years can go by, but your memory will not fade. There's certain events, if they are extraordinary, you'll never forget them. They're kind of etched in your brain, and they stay with you for the rest of your days.